Welcome everyone to the Behaviorally Smart Leadership webinar that we're hosting today with DNA Behavior. And my name is Leon Morales. I am the Chief Relationship Officer here at DNA Behavior. And today I'm also joined with Trip Rockwell, our Chief Marketing Officer, and will be the host today for this Behaviorally Smart Leadership presentation that's associated with our Business DNA product line. The focus of today is really around sort of how leaders use behavioral intelligence sort of in their leadership, developing sort of a leadership culture within their firm. So my email is here along with our LinkedIn contact information. So you're welcome to give us a ring or send us an email or contact us on LinkedIn. We're always available. I just also want a couple housekeeping items. You will receive a copy of a PDF of this presentation so you can use it and possibly circulate it within your teams. You will also receive a recorded session, a link later on today once it's completed. So if you've signed up for the webinar, you will actually get this link to the recorded session. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. And so I really do appreciate everybody joining us today. And sort of the interesting topic is around behavioral intelligence. We hear it a lot. A lot of you probably are familiar with some different types of assessments that have been sort of in the marketplace over the years. And so what I'll do today, and Trip sort of reinforces it with some poll questions, is we're actually going to talk about the importance of using behavioral intelligence in leading teams. It's really defining your own leadership style. So that also relates to human capital management, sort of sales transformation of your organization, and performance coaching. Sort of we're big believers here that, you know, we're all sort of imperfect individuals, sort of in how we're actually wired, and sort of our lessons are really to understand what those are so we can actually optimize it either through other people or just within our own sort of understanding of how we operate. So that will really be the focus today. Our objective here is really understanding sort of how communication and learning style is hardwired, but can be influenced just through awareness, which is really around sort of that starting point of really self-awareness, of understanding sort of workplace behaviors. And we break it down into what we call level 1 and level 2 behaviors, and I'll get into it a little bit more. But what we do here at Business DNA is really understanding sort of what those level 1 behaviors are, because that can really determine sort of how you approach sort of work and the success you'll have as part of that. So we all have what we call level 1 behavior, which is natural and instinctive behavior. And when you match it with level 2 behavior, which is our learned behavior that we learn through our experiences, just relationships and education, work experience. So those two sort of make up the individual. And just so I did a little bit of research that actually came from sort of Daniel Kahneman's work back when he won the Nobel Prize back in 2002 around thinking fast and slow. That really determines that level 1 and level 2 behaviors, if anybody sort of wants to understand where that information comes from. Number 3 is really becoming a leader using sort of adaptation methods to increase sort of results with your team. Number 4 is really leveraging team differences, and I'm a big believer of this because I've had real life experiences of leading teams that didn't achieve the results that were intended, and then with results that were sort of exceeded expectations. And the key to it was really around behavioral intelligence. And then number 5 is really sort of using sort of the behavioral intelligence to build a client service model, that actually increases revenue and team cohesiveness to develop that behaviorally smart culture. So those are the 5 objectives we'll cover today in this presentation. And I wanted to point out, if you have questions as we go through this, there's a chat box. You're welcome to ask questions. Trip monitors that and we'll answer those questions. If it's something that might benefit the entire group, we'll actually bring it up at the end of the call. So please feel free to ask questions. So at its core of what we do here at Business DNA or DNA Behavior is really around sort of the balance of leadership performance. And we measure sort of how results focused somebody is or how relational somebody is. And we all have sort of factors that relate to both of those, but really understanding how to balance that really is the key to sort of performance. And, we've got a number of case studies that we could actually go through to show what that difference is with different leadership styles. And on the core of that is really around the natural behavior discovery. So we'll talk about that as we go through this, a few high points. So in an organization, we see this often. So any of you on the call that might be entrepreneurs or work for small organizations that are really growing, really the same leader that started the company may not be the leader that actually takes the company to the next level, which is really at that startup, which is less than 30 employees. Sort of at that middle stage is 50 to 500 employees, which requires a different sort of leadership sort of focus. And then really around organizational growth is companies that have 500 or more employees, really even, multi, office companies. And sort of the in-between and how to get there can be very challenging because it requires a different set of leadership styles and skills to be able to do that. So those are the three cores of a business transition for leaders. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each one of these, but as we go through this, it'll probably start making some sense of not the same person that started the company, maybe the one that takes them to the next level. And there are reasons for that. And some of it's around emotional intelligence of the individual and really understanding how to bring other people into the organization and really nurture them, for performance. One of the things that we do here at DNA Behavior is we use sort of a methodology called CEO Flow. And we've incorporated using behavioral intelligence as part of that. But turn every employee into a mini CEO. It's really around their roles that they do in the company and trusting them that they'll actually be able to deliver it. So you support them, but you don't micromanage them. You really allow them to be able to use their behavioral intelligence to do the work that they're sort of better suited to do. That really is the impetus of what CEO Flow brings in. If anybody's interested, that's a great book. It's called CEO Flow. And again, we've incorporated it using behavioral intelligence. So I think this is probably a great time to start one of our first poll questions.
Just to get things kicked off, keep us all in check. Good leadership is exemplified by, and select one or more of the following. We've got self-awareness and how natural behavior fits in the workplace. Using adaptation for enhanced engagement with teammates, leveraging team differences to drive better results, improve client service and revenue through team cohesiveness, or a simple all of the above. So let's get those answers in, see where we land and where we might have to review. So we'll go ahead and close up the poll here and share those results. And it looks like we're batting 1,000. That's
okay.
A good start for everybody.
Good. So that's either the slides are done well or I covered them. But that's great. I think that was a good way to those are all key components of really great leadership. So here, the next slide is really around how do you manage through those business expansions, really around growth in a company, and all companies are sort of probably there, for growth or some intended goal, strategy. Growth can be achieved by overcoming the five following sort of points. Spending too much time on the wrong tasks and having people maybe that sort of are not really sort of the right fit for those talents and the passions. 2 is poor execution. Poor focus on the execution really relates to just not being sort of focused on it, and maybe just again not having the right talent focused on it. 3, the inability to see that struggle gets in the way of performance. Sometimes you've got leaders that sort of just have this high level view of what things should get done, but there's a lot more underneath that. And that individual that's actually performing the task may not feel the support of either the organization or the key leaders to be able to explain it. So, they just either give up or they just feel that they're not empowered to bring up that they have sort of blockages in the business. Number 4 is lack of confidence. again, it gets back to, is it the right behavioral fit for the individual? But lack of confidence is they may not have actually received the right level of support from the leader to be able to execute on the role or the duties or tasks. And number 5 is the inability for the team really to engage with customers. That, when your customers call in, they just feel like, it's such a fast-paced environment, they don't even feel like they're a client. They feel like they're sort of a number. So it's important that you actually have sort of on your customer-facing side that you've got people that are sort of warm and friendly, sort of the degree that actually the work would require, but that they're actually sort of able to meet the customer's needs. So those are some of the challenges that you would see in growing the business. So research shows here, and this is through a Harvard Business Review from 2002, that 87% of measurable business issues are communication related. And we all probably have examples in our own work, our own families even, where one person just does not interpret sort of the information the same way. And it's fact-based that they don't. You've got people that are very left-brained, people that are very right-brained, that can actually, you can actually cause blockages in the business just because they are so different in how they communicate. And so if you can actually break down, minimize those communication-related issues, you can really get a lot of throughput in the business. But it's a very hardcore fact that, these things really, and it's whether it's misinformation or just it's that very fast-paced or, it's sort of remedial communications, people are just not listening or just understanding sort of the concepts of what's being sort of discussed. So it's important to know that that's an important takeaway, that 87% can cause blockages and really the blockages in the business. And what we do here with Business DNA is really understanding, somebody's actual natural and instinctive behavior. And we use this iceberg slide because it's one of our favorite slides here, that if you actually don't understand someone's natural and instinctive talents and behavior, it's sort of below the surface. And that's what we measure in this Business DNA discovery. It's sort of the things that are underneath the iceberg, the things that are actually level 2 behaviors, because this is level 1. Over here underneath the iceberg is level 1. Level 2 is this above the surface or above the iceberg. The things that are below the surface may be hidden, maybe we don't understand it, they're blind spots for us. And if you're not actually working in a role that you're naturally suited for, you could actually have sort of a lot of frustration. You may not actually be able to deliver on what you expect to do because you just don't have the natural skills to be able to do it. And the things that we actually learn through our experience and relationships and jobs are that learned behavior, but that can be situational. It can actually change over time. Maybe you just lose passion for something. So at one point in your career, maybe you did have passion for the work, which can override some of that natural and instinctive behavior. But it's important when you know what your natural skills are, through that self-awareness that we talked about at point number 2 at the beginning of the slides, you can really have a much more rewarding career, much better leadership sort of acknowledgement and sort of your own work, and grow the organization. And in this Business DNA talent discovery, it takes about 10 to 12 minutes. It's 46 questions. That's really what measures that level 1 behavior. And towards the very end of this presentation, anybody that is interested in taking that, we actually have a trial that you can actually just take it. There's no obligation. You can actually find out a little bit about your own sort of behavioral insights. And it sort of starts that self-awareness discovery. So I've talked about sort of that level 1 and level 2 behavior. So one of the things that this slide would depict is that Business DNA discovery process of really understanding that natural behavior. It's called our go-to place. Sometimes it's under stress. We absolutely go there. So no matter how much training we've had in level 2 behavior, sort of through education, sort of life situations, if you're under a pressure situation, you will revert back to that natural and instinctive behavior. And sometimes it can be very sharp and very sort of stressful. You create a lot of stress around you, and it's a pressure situation. So just knowing that can be really important. So I think that we will introduce another poll question, which should show up on the screen.
As we move forward, take a quick look back. What percentage of measurable business issues are communication related? So just encourage you to select one of the following: 12%, 33%, 87%, or 92%. And we'll get a good cross-section of folks out there and see what we come up with. A couple more seconds there. Give everyone a chance. I think that's a good number there. Let's see where we ended up. Pretty good there. A vast majority are spot on. Maybe a few others have had experiences otherwise or think otherwise, but 87% is where we like to be.
So that is that Harvard Business Review. That is the 87% of communication issues. So, sometimes, if you have a really good sort of cohesive team, you're probably minimizing that and really kind of having a great throughput with the team. So discovering personal attributes around leadership development. So the way that we measure, and you can see here in this slide that there's what we call natural and instinctive talents here, sort of in the middle at level B. That's what we measure sort of in the natural behavior discovery. But character and integrity, sort of authenticity, sort of emotional stability, all those things are what we sort of have, sort of what I call table stakes, so sort of how we are sort of wired as an individual around who we are. And our character and integrity probably stays pretty true to us, can change sort of through life experiences. Maybe, it's had some very difficult experiences which might have really challenged you sort of on the character and integrity. That does sometimes happen. Your natural and instinctive talents are really going to be, we sort of measure it in 10 different profiles, but, not all people are created equal. So people that have sort of some big challenges in their life might sort of have some sacrifices in the integrity, sort of trust, and how they sort of work with others. And then that third level here, level C, is really around competencies, the things that we endeavor in our career that we gain sort of confidence in learning around. And I'll give you an example. As we go through this, I'm actually an accountant. I sort of grew up, I exited the Air Force and knew I needed a career. So I literally made a very spontaneous decision to go into an accounting profession, get my CPA. After doing it for about 16 years, I realized I wasn't really naturally wired to do it. I sort of was able to do sort of some very good work, but I wasn't naturally wired to be an accountant. I instinctively know sort of the close process and how things work. So I actually developed a lot of those work skills. But my real natural behavior is sort of, I'm what we call an initiator, and so is Tripp, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm so spontaneous and I'm a risk taker, that doesn't really sort of fit the profile of what a typical accountant would show. So it's just important to know all three levels, level A, level B, and level C, around sort of how you discover what those performance attributes are. And then I talked about that natural and instinctive behavior. Remember the iceberg? We call this the starting point. And this is where level 1 behavior is tracked. For every individual, it will be unique and different, but it really will show you sort of how you like to make decisions, sort of the things that you're just naturally gifted at. And then the things that you can actually learn through life experiences are that level 2 can be modified over time and through interest. So that's really, it's just important when you're working in sort of a leadership development program to know what the natural instinctive behavior is, and then you can use other tools to be able to measure what that level 2 behavior is. But if you're actually above the line of what we call natural behavior, you can have some great sort of breakthroughs, but it might not be sustainable long term. Or if you've had some very challenging careers, I'll use the example, if I had stayed sort of in accounting, I probably would have actually been sort of real challenged around staying interested in the work and might have actually gone below that line, or sort of had some self-doubt about the career that I chose. So it's important to know what your natural fit is and the type of work that you're doing. And I always like to introduce what we call the bell curve here around the natural and instinctive behavior. So if somebody's completed the 46 questions, gone through that process, you will see that you will have sort of a measurement in risk around sort of how you like to make decisions, sort of the things that you would really lead to a lot of success. And so if somebody's scoring pattern is 50, they're called what we call an adapter. Sorry about that. If you sort of fall on the line of 50, and I'm actually very close to it, it's sort of an adapter. They can really sort of have very medium sort of intensity in their behavior. When you get outside of under 40 or you're over 60, those behaviors are very intense. So if you get somebody that scores a 76 in a certain factor area, and we measure 64 of them, it can be very intense behavior. So if you know somebody that really sets goals and just, they power through those things, and it's just something that's very important at the detriment of the team sometimes, because they're could be seen as very self-promotional. You can usually determine that they're probably over that 60 range or under the 40. And this isn't really intended to be a training session, but I just wanted to give you sort of an idea of how behavior is sort of measured on that scale. And then the way, after somebody's completed the 46 questions we call natural behavior, it'll actually give the individual, through that self-awareness process, sort of what their style is. And there's 10 styles, and we're big believers of not boxing people in, but this gives you a really good idea of how people are wired. And if you'll remember from our earlier slide, I talked about how relational or results-focused people are. So if you break this slide down, the folks over here on the right, starting with that influencer all the way down to the adapter, they have very sort of relational sort of factors in their profile. And you see that with those folks. So they tend to be a little bit more thoughtful around people issues, and maybe not so much about the goal, because they're really thinking how to get results with people or through people. And then the folks over here on the right, which Tripp and I mentioned are both initiators, tend to fall more on that results side. So, in any given day, if we're working and we see that, Tripp and I can be very focused on our work and maybe not quite as cognizant of what people might need or think, about sort of how to get something done, through people. We tend to be sort of just drivers in our own right. And that's really what you see on that left side of those more results-focused individuals. And if you break the quadrant up a little bit more, you see on the top side of this, people that are very fast-paced, get things done, and then on the bottom moves a little more carefully. They might need more information before they actually execute on a task, where we might just start a task without a lot of information. We might just make some assumptions. They may be the wrong assumptions, but that's what can happen. In a really high-performing team, I see, if we roll them up in a team report, I see that they roll up as an adapter. That would indicate that they have the behavioral insights or behavioral intelligence of an adapter team, can be extremely effective. But again, it can also derail the team, because if you don't really have appreciation for somebody else's results focused or relational focused, it can really derail the team. Okay. And then the breakout, sort of the line on that bell curve, if you remember that I showed you, the adapters right at 50. And each one of these would show the intensity of the bell curve. I'm not going to get into, again, it's not a training session, but it gives you some idea of where each of these profiles would land. And I'll use the example. We measure it sort of over here on the adapter. Actually, I'm going to go to the initiator, since I've talked about Tripp and myself on where our factors are. We're both initiators, represented by this take charge over here, and then a little bit more reserved, and you would see that with us, both of us. And we're sort of more extroverted if there's a purpose. We just don't typically like to go to networking events to network, so we have to have purpose for it. People that are very outgoing like to go to networking events and meet people because they're very people-focused. And then sort of on the, and then the next level here is fast-paced, which both of us tend to lean more towards that fast-paced side. And then we're sort of more spontaneous. sort of in our work. And sort of we're pretty good at adjusting and being flexible. If we were really high planned, it'd be really hard for us to sort of change our plans. And then the last one on this particular chart is we tend to be a little bit more skeptical, which means before we would understand something, we would want to ask questions. So every one of these 10 profiles has a unique makeup, and there's other guides that sort of break down and give you better definitions. But I just wanted to give you an idea on the bell curve where they fall, each one of those. Again, if there's one takeaway from this slide, it's how relational somebody is or how results focused somebody is. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, talking about team performance. Again, it all sort of in the context of using behavioral intelligence to predict better team behavior. So many of you may be familiar with the concept of team structure. We call it forming, storming, norming, and performing. And sort of a team that forms, literally, it's a team coming together, learning how to work together, sort of moving to the storming phase, norming is, and then performing. And each one of them have unique sort of attributes to them. The team in the forming stage is really around somebody just coming in, understanding they have basic skills. Our advice is always run a team report, and you really find out what the strengths of the team are. And this refers to sort of an advisor, but if you're working with sort of an advisory firm, is this advisor sort of the right sort of skill set to be able to actually sell? Is that the type of role that they are? So there are different things in the team that you can actually use this behavioral insights to. With a team that's forming, remember that if a team has been at high performance and one new person comes into the team or one person leaves the team, it starts off again at the forming stage. So even though it might have been a high performing team, one new person coming in can change the dynamics pretty significantly. So it's important to note that. The team's at sort of the next level of the storming stage, and it's very natural to go to a storming stage. It's where you're really understanding the behavioral sort of insights of the team, where you may be out of sync, you don't understand that person's communication style, sort of why they like to plan so much, why are they so spontaneous. You really can see that in that level 1 behavior in this report around what that team's natural and instinctive behavior is. What can create unhealthy patterns is when you don't discuss it, talk about it, understand that what you perceive to be sort of this spontaneity is really a strength in the team if you use it correctly. But it can definitely cause tension, and it can cause tension with your clients because they see that or they hear it. Using business DNA can really sort out those things, really understanding how to leverage the team. If you have the right people focused on the right types of work. And then teams sometimes naturally move into what we call the norming stage. And I think that's that can be a performing team, and it may not be a high performing team, but in the norming stage, it's where you really understand how people are wired. You understand sort of how they work. They really can meet goals. You're regularly asking for input. You're sort of what you would consider to be working well. And each person is sort of working well. And you can actually go between sort of the storming and the norming pretty quickly. But I also wanted to point out that a high percentage of teams never move out of storming. That's a fact, because they really never have appreciation for anybody else's or understanding of the total team's strengths. That's why it's important to know this, because you can think about the loss of productivity in a business when you stay in the storming phase, where there's conflict, where there's things just don't get done timely. There's punitive actions, with people. Not that those aren't a need in the business, but if people really understand how to use the behavioral strengths, they can really have high-performing teams. That's what you're really striving for. So teams that actually achieve that performing stage, these are high-performing teams. And if you've ever heard the term, the sum of each of the parts are greater than the whole, that's really what a high-performing team is, that every individual on the team can perform at a higher level. That's what you're really trying to strive for, and that's where you really understand the behavioral insights, the behavioral power of this team, and it can really solve problems. You can have great client experience, get great referrals, and it really protects your culture. That's the kind of culture that you're trying to create, is high-performance teams, meeting goals, sort of on time, on budget. That's really where you want to be. So it takes effort and time, and you as a leader, it really takes sort of understanding of those level 1 behaviors and how to really optimize the team. There's a really great book. It's about a 1999 book from Simon & Schuster. It's Marcus Buckingham and Kurt Kaufman. It was one of my first books sort of in leading people. It's called First Break All the Rules. It's a really easy book to read, but it really points out things you as a leader want to pay attention to. And first break all the rules means we don't do it sort of from a historical perspective. Do it differently. And it's really focusing attention on what everybody's strengths are and not necessarily focus on the things that they aren't good at. You know, we're big believers here. We're sort of an empowerment company that use those strengths to be able to leverage the team and not focus on sort of the things that they aren't so good at. So with that, I think we've got another poll question we want to tee up.
Another quick review. The 4 stages of project team development are, and I'll let y'all read those on your own and come to your own conclusion. But we'll give everyone a couple of seconds to get in there and see where we end up. All right. Close up the polls. See what we get. All right, a little bit of deviation here, but yes, certainly forming, storming, norming, and performing, what we just covered, the 4 attributes that of team structure. Glad that we're all moving forward on the same page for the most part.
And just to point out that forming, assigning duties, reporting, and reviewing, that is all part of the workflow and the task review, so it is important to team, but that forming, storming, norming, and performing is really around those stages of a team. So if you actually do an internal review of your team, you can probably determine pretty quickly where you are. If it's a new team, obviously it's informing, but most teams stay in that storming and norming when you have conflict or you just don't think things are getting done timely. You know, if you are actually getting things done timely, you know, people really understand the strengths when you're assigning tasks. That's where you're in the performing stage. So thank you, Tripp, for that. Okay, and just to sort of close that, I recommend that First Break All the Rules. It's a great read. There's one takeaway here. It's just really understanding how to use individuals' strengths in the work that they're doing. And one key learning that I had early in my career is spend time with each one of your direct reports. It's important, and even if it's 30 minutes a week. And one learning I had early on was, because I'm spontaneous and I'm a risk taker, you know, I would ask one of my subordinates if I could reschedule a meeting. And probably after the 3rd time that happened, the individual actually called me out and said, you know, if you think this is important to our development, then stick with the meeting. It was a really sort of an important lesson to me because I was just taking for granted that she would be okay with me rescheduling the meeting. But it really, I sort of provided great feedback to her for calling me out on it. It's important you be authentic. If you set a meeting, unless something really does come up in the business, follow through with it. It's important. But bottom line is that teamwork. That's what you're really trying to create. In the work that we do here around leadership performance, there are sort of 6 pillars here that are outlined. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each one of these, but it really gives sort of the way that our methodology that we use when we're actually doing a team engagement. Whenever we're actually brought in to an organization, you know, we spend a lot of time with the leader because it's really the culture of that team and that organization is really predicated on that leader, understanding their natural and instinctive talents. And sometimes a leader may think something's going on in the organization because maybe the throughput isn't getting done properly. a lot of times there are a lot of other things going on that are creating sort of blockages in the business. So that leader review is understanding what the goals are, really what they're sort of trying to accomplish as part of the review. And then the second phase is we always like to do team meetings, individual team meetings, really understanding the behavioral strengths of each individual and how that sort of rolls up in the total team. And then there's a stage where we actually meet with the team, really understanding the productivity, what are they trying to achieve as a team. And then number 4 is really around leveraging those relationships, understanding, yes, somebody's wired a little bit differently than I am around their relationships or their results, but really we can optimize these things. And then there's a continuous feedback. That leader coaching is important. It's not really about a consultant coming in. It's doing peer-to-peer coaching. It's important. If you see somebody sort of struggling and maybe having a blockage, if another team member steps in and helps them, it can lead to a lot of productivity and leading to that really breakthroughs into that, moving to that performance stage. And then team monitoring. Are you doing a good job of quarterly or annual meetings, really measuring your performance? I'm a big believer of after action reviews. If you do that, you really learn some key information about if you're working on proposals. Do those after action reviews, find out what went well, if the client's willing to divulge, sort of maybe why they didn't go with your service. Understand what that is. It really can lead to a lot of great breakthroughs in the business. So those are the key 6 pillars of leadership development here that we sort of work with individuals, coaches, and consultants. And then this is just a view. We talked about those 10 different profiles. I showed you sort of the line, the bell curve line. This is just an example of what one of those individuals, it's called a strategist. This is somebody that's very results focused. There's a page for every individual, and it lists things that they're great at, sort of a general description. I always like to focus on the things that help maximize their potential. And again, everybody's uniquely wired, so a strategist is going to be distributed about 10% of everybody completing the natural behavior discovery ends up being a strategist. But these are just generally good ways to help them maximize their potential. So as a giveaway, as part of being part of this presentation today, we'll send out the unlocking guide, which has all 10 profiles listed in that. And I would encourage you to actually take the profile or the discovery that's at the end of this slide deck, because you can match that up, sort of get an understanding. And if you want to have a team member complete their own natural behavior discovery, can lead to some great sort of thinking and understanding of each other's styles. And this is just what we call a one-page factor. It really shows, this is Chris Coddington, who is a strategist, somebody you know well here at our company. Chris Coddington, and you can see, if you recall from our earlier discussion, that somebody that would score 50 would be an adapter. You can see that Chris Coddington has some pretty intense scores that are outside of that 40 and 60 range. So if I'm working with him, or if he's the leader, these are important, really important insights to know when I'm working with him, because we can lead to some great team performance if we really understand how each other is wired. And then really around performance challenges that we're big believers of, again, sort of coincides with first break all the rules. Hold the team accountable for performance. It's not about punishment. It's about, if you say this is what we're going to do, sort of measure that. People will pay attention to it. Clear messages in the communication, reinforcing that, whether it's team meetings, daily meetings, however you sort of reinforce that, can lead to great results. Responding to events sort of that are out of balance, maybe that just not using sort of punitive measures can be important. Being authentic, that's one thing I always hear and I'm a big believer of. And earn trust. And again, getting to those one-on-one meetings, you can have sort of breakthroughs just with trust if you do that. And then make sure that you're doing proper succession management with your team. People have different sort of needs for career development. If they leave your team or they move to another group within the company, that's not a sort of, any sort of reflection on the leader. it's just that they're going to work sort of in their passion, but make sure that you've got sort of the right leadership, sort of succession planning, so you don't end up carrying the burden of the work, if somebody leaves. You want to make sure you have redundancy in the roles as far as tasks, that people really understand what each other's doing. And then the leadership engagement model, we see this often with leaders. Again, sort of, if you remember back to how results focused somebody is or how relational. And we see this often where leaders, maybe they're just in that storming phase where they will withdraw. Indications are they may retreat, hide, they may abandon, they may have a lot of fear. You may never see it, but that's what can manifest, with a withdrawn leader. So people don't really understand why they're being withdrawn. You might see that characteristic with somebody that's more reserved. They're just not feeling like they're being successful. Where you really want to be is in the engage section of this, really where you're initiating, you're having dialogue, you're really understanding, you're trusting, you're staying engaged. You're using really sort of these key sort of behavioral sort of approaches with people that are really keeping them engaged. And the other thing you don't want to do is dominate, where you're controlling, dictating, forcing, and bullying, which can really lead to sort of unproductive behavior, definitely keeping you in the storming phase of the model. So it's important you try to stay sort of engaged with individuals, again, earning trust, keeping people really leveraging sort of their strengths. In defining EQ, and we hear that a lot around emotional intelligence, and it's, again, that level 2 behavior, because we all sort of are wired for results or relationships, but it's really leveraging that emotional intelligence when you're working with somebody that has emotional intelligence. Comes from both sides of the wheel. It's really understanding sort of how you actually impact other people in the work that's being presented. So self and others, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. That's really all emotional intelligence is, understanding sort of how you're impacting your team or how your team members are impacting the team. It's important. And we see this around closing the behavioral gap that 70%, and this is a fact here, you can have upwards of 70% team productivity gains. Again, this is a high-performing team by doing these things. Team trust, team values, really optimizing people's strengths, understanding how the communication works and flows back and forth. Really, can you have much great throughput? And that's based on a 2009 Gallup research poll. And then when we work with the DNA performance model, again, getting back to the 6 pillars, really understanding, acceptance, respect, and trust all relate to team success. If you're aligning all of those things, you can really move to that team success. Again, you really want to move from the forming, the storming, the norming, and progress to that performance model. And it's really, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for the trust, building a trustful team. And it doesn't mean that you just accept what people say. There are those of us that'll be a little bit more skeptical, would question. That doesn't mean that we don't trust somebody. It just means we're trying to understand. And we talked a little bit about on the bell curve. Everybody that completes the natural behavior discovery has what we call the strengths, the struggles, and that'll come out sort of in the profile. And as things, you always want to focus on the strengths, minimize or mitigate the struggles. But those mid-range scores can be a little bit more flexible. Like I'm close to an adapter in my profile, but I still have sort of things that I really have to work on. So just understanding what those strength struggles are important. And I think we have another poll question that should surface.
Another opportunity to check and see where we are today. Thank you, Leon. What team productivity gains can we expect to see based on enhanced behavioral engagement? And we'll give everyone a chance to weigh in there. And as soon as we get a good cross-section, we will let that Go. And there we are.
Okay, well, 70%. Again, you really want to optimize that 70% because you're in that performance stage. So great work. Thank you. And then, if anybody sort of wants to be on that path of understanding the leveraging of the towns, there are several reports and diagnostics that we use as part of that. Really aligning people with sort of the right roles is important, and really understanding, accepting, respecting differences for the enhanced teamwork. And one thing I definitely have had a learning in my own life is, no two people will do the work the same way. And you can really learn a lot sometimes when you've assigned a project, and just sort of the creativity around sort of breaking through some things that maybe, you've been a little bit more anchored or experience based on, but putting somebody that really has more creative touch can lead to big breakthroughs. So understanding that differences can really lead to big results. And then there's one report that we use a lot, not only in client services, but with our team, is really around the comparison report. And we like this report because it really shows the behavioral differences between two people. I really like this report a lot, but you can see here that Chris is this lighter green and then John is the darker green. You'll see here, you've got such a big difference between how they take, that Chris is going to take charge. John's going to be pretty cooperative if he's in the zone, but could go off the rails if they're not careful. And then you see here where John, even though he's at 50%, is going to definitely be more content than Chris is pioneering, which means breaking through walls. So they're going to have a very big difference in their behavioral sort of makeup, and understanding the difference between the two of them is going to be pretty important in their work deliverables. So you can learn a lot from a comparison report, which could lead into a team report. And then finally, we have a Leadership 360 process as part of Business DNA in the suite of tools. It's really around sort of a self-assessment that the person would go through in these core areas of job competence, results, effective communication, relationship building, leader EQ, trust, and business values. It's really a great tool to use, and it really builds off of natural behavior, that level 1 behavior. This almost brings in the information of leader level 2 behavior. And then all of the subordinates and leaders would rate that individual based on the same questions, and you really see where you have some differences. Is this person really sort of leader they think they are? It's important. It's a very vulnerable exercise to go through. It leads to a lot of breakthroughs and definitely moves the team to that performance stage. Then finally, just to talk a little bit about sort of what the science is behind the natural behavior discovery. It's a 46-question discovery, and it measures 64 factors. And we've covered a number of those. We didn't get into too much detail, but it's really around a forced choice methodology. So it really manufactures sort of an environment where you're going to get underneath that level 1 behavior. We've been around since 2001, about 60 man-years of development. We independently validate the system. We have about 1 million profiles in the system, so it's highly validated. And then we're in 123 countries that have been completed the natural behavior discovery and translated in 11 different languages. I think we have another poll question that should pop up.
Just in part of wrapping things up for you guys today, other behavioral topics you might be interested in learning more about. And it all goes into what we do here at DNA Behavior and the educational opportunities that we provide for our clients. So we'll just get a quick cross section here, and you can kind of see a lot of risk management out there, which is good. That's pretty topical.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that has been sort of a topic. I think we're going to run a Behaviorally Smart Entrepreneur webinar next month, and we've done a couple on improved hiring and talent development. So this is great. We're doing the team building today, so excellent. Thank you. And then sort of all of our contact information is here, and there is a link here to the Business DNA Natural Behavior Discovery. You can just click on it, self-register, go through that process. It's pretty informative. And again, we'll send everybody that's been on the call the unlocking guide. But we encourage you to follow our blogs, the link there, and then you can follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. And then requesting the copy is actually, there's a link there for that unlocking guide. So with that, we're going to give you, if there are no other questions that have been presented in the chat box, I think Trip has been handling
a couple of personal ones, but they were pretty easy to fix, and then but not much to share with the rest of the team.
Okay. As Trip mentioned, we do take the feedback on what types of webinars you'd like to see in the future. So if we didn't have one in the list, please submit that to either Trip or myself. We'll be happy to sort of tee that up. And with that, we appreciate your time, give you a few minutes back to your day, and you will expect the presentation and call recording later today.
Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.